In today's complex environment, almost every major project, from mining to transmission lines, is contentious. Hi, my name is Allie Mears.
And I'm Bing Giroux.
Welcome to Primary Risk, where each month we speak with the people behind the projects shaping our world.
We'll be hosting candid conversations and hearing from industry leaders, political figures, engineers, and project proponents. We'll be exploring the soft issue risks, challenges, and solutions, and behind-the-scenes stories of what it took to get these complex projects across the finish line. Or not.
Brian Kynoch is currently the president of Imperial Metals and has been working with the company since 1995. Imperial Metals owns and operates Mount Polley Mine and Huckleberry Mine, and permitted and built Red Chris Mine, which it is now a 30% owner of. A civil engineer and a member of Engineers and Geoscientists BC and the Canadian Institute of Mining, Metallurgy, and Petroleum, Brian has been involved in exploration, permitting, development, commissioning, and operation, as well as reclamation of numerous mines and mineral properties across British Columbia, Nevada, and Colorado. There are really few individuals in this province who have successfully permitted and opened 3 mines, and Brian is one of them. Red Chris, Nickel Plate, and Mount Polley mines were all successfully commissioned under Brian's watch. We are so grateful to have you with us here today, Brian.
Oh, no, thank you, Allie.
Thanks for being here. Can you maybe start by just telling us about growing up around mining?
Okay, well, I guess in the very beginning, I actually grew up around construction. My father, I think I lived in 5 construction camps the first 5 years of my life. So my dad and my mother went up along the Fraser Canyon Highway, building the Fraser Canyon Highway. And anyways, we then moved to Coquitlam so I could go to school. So we lived in Coquitlam. And when we lived in Coquitlam, my dad, actually, not too long ago, I got one of his old daily books out. And he worked 28 and 4 schedule. So he would be away from home in the summer. He'd be away from home for 28 days. And the 4 days, he was the book I was reading, he was working on the pulp mill at Gold River. He would drive it would take him 1 day to get back to Coquitlam. He'd spend 2 days with us and then the day to get back to work on the construction of the pulp mill. So in '67, he decided, well, maybe actually through some friends of his, he got a chance to go work at a mine. And he thought that was a really good idea because he could go home every night. And it probably even a better idea for him. So when we went to work at a mine, rather than live in the local community and him have to drive 45 minutes to an hour to get to work, he decided we were going to live 5 minutes away from the mine, and then we would take the bus to go to school every day. So he was right beside the mine. And it's probably one of the reasons I'm in mining. I grew up on top of the biggest copper deposit in BC. I grew up on top of Highland Valley Copper. So anyways, yeah, I just grew up around mining. I think I was 12 years old when I went there. And I guess the other thing for me is, and maybe you're going to ask me the summer jobs thing. So, you know, hanging around the mine, my dad was very strict. I could never work at a mine where he worked. But I could work for the company if I did something else. So I went off, after first year university, I went to the Northwest Territories with Bethlehem Copper.
I thought you were just about to tell us that you were going to start working at 12, and I was so nervous.
No. Well, actually, I did, but I was moving irrigation pipe for a rancher. But that's more like fun, not real work. I don't know. It was make some spending money. But anyways, went to the Northwest Territories, 4 years of university. I could make, I guess it always a soft spot for me because I could make enough money I didn't have to go ask mom and dad for money to go to university. I could rent an apartment. I had money enough, I thought, for the beer I wanted to drink, and I'd run out of money maybe late April, and then off I go somewhere and they feed me and pay me, and I got enough money when I come back in September. So mining did well, but I did well by mining, so, and I grew up there, so.
Okay, so summer jobs, you grew up in this industry. What drew you? Like, what made you want to get into it right away?
I think, you know, I'm a civil engineer working in mining. I think, and I tell everybody, I tell my daughters, like, my life's always been easy because I think I was 6 years old when I told my dad I was going to be an engineer. So then it was just, so a little bit of the civil thing is because, like, when I was, the first 5 years of my life, my dad was always building highways or building pulp mills or pouring concrete. So that's the civil part, and then the mining kind of came later because I grew up like 12 to 18. I grew up around it. Then I go spend time out in the bush with a bunch of geologists. So I learned a lot about exploration hanging around in the summer doing like it. You could argue it's menial because, you know, I was setting up camps, hauling drill core down the hill, soil sampling, stream sampling, lake sediment sampling. But you kind of got to know like how they went about looking for things.
What excites you about mining? I mean, it sounds like you like everything about it, but if you had to kind of distill it down into that 6-year-old you that wanted to become an engineer, and then you were exposed to it at such a young age and lived on top of a mine, what is it that excites you about mining?
Well, it's kind of like what it could do for the community. So like I moved from Coquitlam to a little town, Ashcroft, where before the mine was there, it's like a little bit of logging, a little bit of agriculture, like cattle and stuff like that. And everybody's getting minimum wage. Then a mine comes along and, you know, people can buy new houses. There's cars. The wages, it's kind of like, it's transforms the lives of many people. I know at Red Chris, one of the biggest things for me is you see young women come to me and say they've never been further south than Terrace and Smithers, and they're taking their 2 weeks off and going to London. Like, isn't that neat?
Yeah. Well, but Brian, like it was transformative to you because you grew up next to it, you learned about it. How did that turn from being somebody who, you know, could have been a truck driver, could have been a haul truck driver, you could have been lots of other things. Like, what made you want to get into the more, I guess, the more technical aspects of it, designing, building them, making mines, which we're going to get into this in a second, though, how you actually built some mines. How did you make that transition that, I want to be an engineer, or I want to be somebody who actually is in charge of these things?
An interesting little thing there. So I worked for 6 months for a consulting engineering company in Vancouver, and right after I graduated. And, you know, 6 months later, a mining company said, well, Brian, can you come help us do that? Like, it was dewatering a big underground.
Where was that?
Braylorn, dewatering Braylorn. So then I go into the corner office to say, I remember they've just hired me. I'm a graduate engineer. They're training me. I'm gonna be one of their engineers, right? I go in and I say, I'm gonna go work for a mining company. And he says, I guess you have to decide whether you're going to be a consultant or a principal. And I said, yeah, I guess I've decided I want to be a principal, not a.
I love that story. And you are really an implementer. I mean, I'm not here to pump your tires, but there are so few people that I think like getting their hands dirty like you do with a project, and like seeing it move from an exploration phase through to the environmental assessment process, which we all know has become increasingly more difficult to get through, to actually commissioning and operating. There's not a lot of people that are able to do that, and you're one of them. And I kind of want to move towards that, because we were talking about mining and how mining changes communities. But long before mining, as you know, we have to actually find a mineral deposit. And in fact, 9 of 10 mines in BC was discovered by a prospector. So, you know, there's been a trend towards mining companies from moving away from exploration projects and focusing more on acquiring juniors. But Imperial Metals has, as Bing always says, a list as long as your arm of exploration projects. Why is that? Why have you maintained a robust exploration program at Imperial?
Well, you asked me like why I like mining, and one of the reasons that mining is kind of so wonderful is when you discover something that wasn't known before, right? Like, it's the joy of discovery, and it's long odds, but then every once in a while, a couple of my sayings around the office is we're only one drill hole away. Like, you know, you were there when we drilled those holes at Red Chris, like 2 drill holes, and you change the complete, you know, context of this deposit. So yeah, like it's wonderful to explore and have success. Like, it's long odds, but when you get to do it, it feels really good to discover something.
But I mean, Imperial, part of the narrative we're going on here, Imperial is sort of from soup to nuts, from early stage exploration to actually building, developing, and even at some point doing the reclamation of these mines. Why are so many of your competitors or peers not doing that anymore? Why are they only focused on one part of the food chain? There's just exploration companies or just mine operators.
Isn't that kind of almost a little bit more the way the world works now?
But why are you different?
Well, why am I different? well, maybe because I'm older, but it's like, the thing is, isn't it kind of neat to take something from nothing all the way to the end? Just doing a piece doesn't feel quite the same as going
Different
the whole,
from being a consultant and a
like,
principal?
It's like, it's kind of but it's your baby. It's yours. You want it to become like, okay, let's go. And we if you don't start at the bottom, fair enough. It's like, and we've done that too. Like, I talked before, we bought Goldstream. So that Noranda built a mine and we bought it from them. We bought Huckleberry too. It's not that you don't go look for opportunities that aren't that long path. But if you can do the long path, that's really, really neat. And I guess the one other thing, so I grew up in Highland Valley, Bethlehem Copper. So the story of that, a guy by the name of Spud Eustace, and I'm saying his name, it's not really Spud, but that's Spud Eustace is what he was
There's an
called.
award.
AME has the Spud Eustace
So
Award.
so that's the award. But like, I kind of grew up like, I didn't know him that well, but I knew of him, and so here's a guy that's a geologist. He spent every summer prospecting in the bush for like years, like eking out a living. Then Bethlehem Copper was the thing that made it for him. But here's a guy that was like the very beginnings of prospecting, like exactly what we're talking, like smaller than a small company, because he was an individual almost in the beginning, right? And it's neat, so those 4 years I worked, I saw a claim post with Spud Eustace.
Out
so
there, physically putting in the posts.
He was up near Red Chris sometime way early, right?
Well,
So he wandered all over BC looking for stuff, almost as an individual. And he found, like, Highland Valley, you can argue that's his.
But, it's so hard to be a Spud Eustace these days because it's tough to get permits and it's tough for prospectors to be able to actually develop their permits into something meaningful that even a junior company is interested in. So how are we gonna change that? What are some ideas that you have on changing that so we can actually get these critical minerals out of the ground? Because we keep hearing the term critical minerals, but what are we doing to get them?
Well, I'm not exactly sure kind of what to do, but we do need to use 9 out of 10 of the mines were found by individual prospectors. Somehow we have to keep that alive. And it's certainly difficult. Like, somehow we have to keep them engaged and give them a chance. Like, the reason they're doing it is for the same reason that, like, okay, I've discovered something, the big win. We have to give them the chance for the big win. And when probably his biggest problem then was funding. Like, how do you get people to give a guy money to go out and prospect? And now it's kind of gone from funding's the problem. You got a good idea. We're going to be on a pot. If you got a good idea, the world's kind of out there, and you'll probably get funded. But now the problem is, okay, I've got a really good idea, but can I get through permitting to implement it?
Will somebody let me do it?
Yeah, like, will anybody let me use my idea? And so the problems, I see the problem has shifted. It used to be like, how do I fund this? How do I get somebody to help me? And now it's, okay, well, I can get the funding, but how do I? And that is kind of a bit of a catch-22. Like, okay, I've got a really good idea, but I don't have the permits. Are you going to fund them? Right? So, and then how do you go raise money? I've got a really good idea, but first off, I need $1 million to permit it before I even get to try my new good idea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so I'm not sure the way out, but we've turned the problem kind of on its head.
Which is sort of taking the entrepreneurial nature out of it, which is maybe why some of your, I guess, peers or competitors, they're not interested in that. They'll pick up what somebody else has found.
Right.
Well, let's talk maybe a little bit more about, because we do want to talk about the whole life cycle of mines and what's working and what's not. I mean, the whole point of this podcast is, we're talking about primary risk. What are the risks? What are the main risks that major industrial projects like mining face? And we've talked about what they used to be. Maybe it was finding enough money or somebody's interest to look. But we're finding that the risks now are entirely different. Like, what you're facing, what you spend most of your time doing now, how different is that than what you spent most of your time doing in, say, 1995?
Well, it's completely different. Because, like I said, before you'd have the idea and the big problem was, selling your idea to get the funds to do it. But, if we had a mining claim and everything was in order, you would get permits if you followed the Mines Act and the environmental acts, right? Like, you didn't need to get permission if you followed
as long as you follow the rules.
Well, you get to build it. So it's kind of one of my things. I keep talking about zoning, like zone and area mining, so we don't we know we get to build it. Like, tell us where we're supposed to go, right? Like, give us some. We've lost that thing where you don't have you can follow all the rules and still not be able to build a mine.
Well, let's expand on that. So take us back to maybe nickel plate mine, because that was a mine that was done a bit further ago than maybe Red Chris. What was it like permitting that mine and getting that mine up and running? Can you tell us a bit more about
time frames?
Yeah, time frame.
85, I think it was.
Okay.
How long did it take to?
Probably a year.
A year to permit it.
Yeah, no, the paper is like inconsequential by today's standards. I don't know about that much paper. In a lot of ways, like I every once in a while I dig those old things out, because today the way I look at it, when we go permit something, we generate so much paper and so much data. I'm not sure any one person reads it all.
It's unlikely.
Yeah, it's too much, right? So the one thing I would give credit to our old ones is like, you had a document that whoever you were, you could read front to back and understand what we were going to do. And maybe that's too simple, but the documents we produced, people would read it all.
I mean, obviously you want better standards, better regulation. You want to protect the environment. I think that's what everybody. I don't think there's any dispute there. But is every additional document giving you that much additional environmental protection? At a certain point, you're getting
right. It gets
diminishing returns.
The wins are diminished. Right. Okay, we're going to do all this, but what sometimes it's like, what are the really important things, and then maybe we shouldn't be doing all this over here and focusing more on this. Whereas the regulations are, okay, well, you do everything right.
Mm-hmm. I want to pivot a little bit, and this is actually a question. We have two questions today that are for both Bing and Brian. And just for context to anyone that's listening, Bing was the VP of Corporate Affairs at Imperial Metals for 5 years?
No, 3
years?
Something.
You did a lot.
15 years ago.
Okay, a lot happened in 3 years. So some of these questions that I'm going to ask Brian, I'm also kind of putting to Bing today. And one of them is talking about the Highway 37 project. So why was that project so important to the successful development of the Red Chris mine? Can you tell me a bit about the project itself? I know there was a lobbying effort involved in it, and I know that the project is being used for other assets today.
The power line? The power line. So one of the things, let's say before that power line's built, go look where the Highland Valley is, where Gibraltar is, where all the mines are. The mines are all where there's BC hydro infrastructure to supply the power. Big copper mines need huge amounts of power to grind the rock up and to liberate the copper so we can get it out. They're big, takes big energy to break that rock up. And, that's why I say, you build that power line, there will be mines. You don't build the power line, there won't be mines. It's pretty simple. The mines won't work. I remember, I think Red Chris was originally discovered in like 1957, in the 50s for sure anyways. And like, you go in the old files and read this one, and somebody's done a little, I don't know, half a dozen page thing on the feasibility. Like, can we build a mine there? And he comes to the part, he's calculating what it'll cost to generate hydro with diesel. And he doesn't need to go any further because it won't work with that amount of diesel. It doesn't work. So he doesn't go any further, and there's no power line. So till there's power, there aren't mines.
Well, I remember, because you hear it now, even when we talk about investing in infrastructure, there was a lot of argument like, well, this is going to be a white elephant. We don't need to build this line. It's a white, it's just there to subsidize one particular mine. And since then, you've got this incredible growth of mines. They call it the Golden Triangle. Tall 10 nations got a huge amount of employment, taking greater control of their own destiny. There's green energy projects up there. We've got fiber optics to Iskut. Like, if you were to take We did I remember we funded a KPMG did a study that sort of presumed what the return on this power line might be. But if we were to do that study again today, not that anybody would pay for it, but I'm sure we would show that the returns, even just from Red Chris alone, are there. It's paid for itself. That power line's paid for itself easily. And the province used to be like that, for good or for bad. I mean, people have different opinions on this, but the sort of WAC, Bennett, build the province, build the roads, build the infrastructure, and we'll all benefit from it. That's a lot of that's been lost. The idea that you would build something today for future returns, if it doesn't give a return immediately today, then we shouldn't do it.
Right.
And so I think that's been a little bit lost because the investments, for example, WAC did it with BC Hydro, we're still living off those investments that were 50, 60 years ago. And I think we're seeing that with Highway 37.
And look at the Yukon. They really want, right?
Yeah. Now the Yukon's asking for the line to be extended.
They know it'll change their lives.
Yeah, there was a World Bank study, and I need to find the reference again, but it was done some years ago, that large-scale infrastructure, roads and power lines and those types of things that sort of network around a territory, they raise all boats. Like, everybody benefits from that. If so a big superhighway, a power line, if there's off-ramps or non-ramps. So if the locals can plug in, then everybody can benefit, and it actually raises everybody's level of income, local GDP. But if you just build it through and there's no on and off ramps, then it really only benefits the particular industry. And I think what happened with Red Chris certainly with Highway 37, is there was a true commitment to make sure that there was off ramps, and the local governments, the Tahltan Nation, they got the benefits of fiber optics, of electricity, so that there are other benefits beyond simply the mine getting its rock crushed.
Right, and you could do other things, like you said, run a river power. So you're part of the continent. You're not kind of way up there.
And we're seeing that now, right? There's this huge demand for electricity, and we haven't. The only way to produce it is to invest, even though those returns might be in the future. But digressed a bit. I mean, Highway 37 was the great thing about that was a coalition, and I think Imperial led this yourself and Pierre LaBelle. The great thing about it is a coalition of mining companies, of local communities, of First Nations, that pushed for a piece of infrastructure that other parts of the province, the south certainly wasn't that, power line in the middle of nowhere, like they weren't interested in it. But it was an effort it's the kind of thing that showed that communities and First Nations and industry working together can build the province.
No, Bing, you were a big part of that. You were up there
helping a lot of time on little airplanes that year.
Right, helping us.
Yeah. That was
helping us help them. Like, it really does change that part of the country.
Well, I mean, I haven't been up there recently, but you go up to Red Chris regularly. Like, talk about the economic benefits of that. This is with all due respect, this is not those parts of the province are not going to have huge tourism opportunities. They just don't. There's just not enough people. There's not a great amount of forestry in that area either. No. So what are you going to do for industry?
Right.
And now, Tahltan, I mean, I don't know what their level of employment is.
Well, I think people who want a job have a job up there. And that is part of the thing mining can do is, right, we can give you a job where if you want to live way out there, if we're near you, you can live way out there and come to work every day and make a living.
Yeah.
Right? So I guess that's the thing. So I grew up in Highland Valley. Like, okay, I did go move irrigation pipe. That moving irrigation pipe wasn't going to make me enough money to go to university and pay for university. It's like, and the jobs are good enough. Like I said, the young woman that got to go to London, like they make enough money. The world, it's a different world they live in.
Yeah, and I think I was told, because you and I know lots of people with the Nation up there, that I was told that they got to a point very recently there where they had no children in government care. They were able to, where children needed additional support because of issues at home, the Nation was able to take care of them because there's enough wealth up there that they can manage a lot of these problems themselves instead of having to rely on sending a kid to foster care down here on the coast or something. So, that's a real outcome.
Right. So
You guys were talking about the importance of Highway 37, the power line project up there for Red Chris. Red Chris was a pretty controversial project. I remember reading articles about it around the time it was being permitted. What were some of the other challenges, Brian, that you faced in permitting Red Chris and getting it to where it is today?
Well, I guess the thing is, we talked about the tall town, and well, from my perspective, if you want to build a mine, the most important thing to do is try to become part of the local community. I remember talking around a fire and say, okay, like when we first went there, Galore Creek was being built. It got stopped afterwards, but it was being built, and I remember getting told, we only need one mine a generation, so you can go away you can go away. And I said, okay. I said, no, well, I don't really want to go away because and you maybe shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. So we're gonna try our damnedest to be. We're not leaving. We're gonna be the best we can be to be part of this community. We're gonna work with you. We're gonna figure out what kind of you need, what we need, and how can we get from kind of here to there. And I think a big part of that's persistence. Okay, like you don't always, you don't go in they hug you and say build a mine. No, you have to try to become engaged, become part of the community. And I don't think we ever really are part, but you have to try to be part.
Yeah, and that's spending a lot of time in those communities. But I think those relationships have lasted, right? Many of those people that we worked with in those days, those are all still friends and colleagues to this day. So it wasn't just for the sake of the mine. Those relationships have lasted.
Right. As I say, become part of the community. Like get to know people, see what they need, what they want.
Well, and you've touched on the importance of First Nations relationships and partnerships with Red Chris, working closely with the Tall Town. Another question I have for both you is, a few years before the tailings breach at Mount Poly, Imperial Metals signed the first ever in Canada operating mine agreements. You actually signed them not just with Williams Lake First Nation and Hatzel First Nation related to the Mount Poly project, but you also signed them with Cheslata, Wet'suwet'en First Nation, and the Office of the Wet'suwet'en for Huckleberry. Can you tell us about the process that led to the signing of those agreements, and maybe why you want to do this, because it had never been done before?
Well, I'll start from Bing was part of that as well. So remember, I grew up I grew up right beside a mine. Like the Bethlehem pit was right above our house, right above the lake we lived on, and so anyways, I'll call myself a country boy. I was up in the bush and near a mine, and so you're impacted by what the mine does because you're living right beside it. It's kind of like, let's say there was a big copper deposit on top of Grouse Mountain, and I wanted to try to mine it. The only way I could mine it is become like you're going to deal with the community that lives there because they're the ones impacted. So, a lot of these places, our nearest neighbors are First Nations. So they're the ones going to be most impacted. So those are the ones we should talk to.
So, I remember when we were doing this, Brian, or flying around the province a lot, but I don't really know what you had to, what permissions, because I was working for you, what did you have to go through to get, because nobody was doing this from your, from investors, from your board, from, even for your, the other companies. I don't know what you had to go through to go along with this idea that we should do these deals. I don't recall that.
I think, from my perspective, I've been very lucky. We have a major. Since I've worked for Imperial, we've had a major shareholder who's had a big influence and a steadying influence. And it's like, I think if you go forward and you say, well, here's what I think the right thing to do is, that I've always been nobody's ever said, well, you can't do that because here's what we need to do. And, I'm not sure we get all the permits if we take any others. Do you know what I mean? In a lot of ways, what other stance is there?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But, nobody else was doing it.
I know, but you could feel the changing times. Remember what I said kind of when we were talking earlier, is like, it used to be, if you stake a claim and follow all the regulations, you get to build a mine. You didn't have, it was your right to mine. Follow all the regulations. You'll get in trouble if you, but now it's, you know, we can follow all the regulations and still not get to build a mine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just thinking that you know, those nations, their relationships with those mines, like I don't really recall what it was with Williams Lake and Hatzell, but I remember Cheslada had an actual hostile relationship with and the mine leading up to that, because in hindsight, it was really just because they weren't included. Because once everybody came together, it was easier to the permitting didn't get any easier, but it was easier to move forward, right? And I think it was like that hostility, even though like some of it had, there were a lot of technical and environmental issues raised. The fundamental issue was not this particular environmental issue or this particular issue with your tailings or your waste rock. It was really that we just weren't included.
Right.
And so they were being left out. And once you started including them, the relationships improved.
Go to the local community and try to become part of it.
Yeah. And now everybody does it, right? I mean, IBAs are, nobody does this without that sort of thing. It's almost, and again, you know, we talk about this podcast. What's your first risk? In a different time, your first risk was technical. Today, your first risk is people, subjective.
Right.
And if you don't address that, I mean, that's the times we live in. You like it or not, that's the times we live in.
You have to adapt.
Can I bring up something else controversial? So first of all, thanks for talking about First Nations partnerships, because I think that's a big piece of Imperial Metals' approach. And obviously, Bing, having worked with the company, has done a lot of those around the province. But if we can maybe change a bit to talking about environmental groups, because we do see conflict, right, between even First Nations and environmental groups within the province when major projects are being built. So can we talk about Giant Copper, a property that Imperial Metals did own and then sold to the BC government a couple years ago? Can you maybe give us a bit of history on that project, Brian, and sort of where that project has gone?
Well, Giant Copper was almost a copper mine in the mid-50s. So they did all the underground development needed, and they were starting to build a mill. And this is up a little bit east of Hope then actually in Manning Park. And the regulation.
Was the park?
No, it was in Manning Park. So, but you were allowed to mine in a park in the 50s. Price of copper dropped. They left. It was sporadically explored by others, and then us after we acquired it. And then I guess the thing is, it's kind of the thing. So it's a big copper deposit, and everybody's focused. It's a breccia pipe. You can go see it's above. It's alpine. You can kind of go see the outcrop. It's kind of obvious.
Wait, what's outcrop?
It's where the mineralization comes right to the surface, and it's alpine. So you know, with your eyes you can see the copper minerals. You don't have to dig trenches or soil sample. You can see the top of it. So for years, all the focus was on that, and then, but I'd say not quite economic, kind of always on the edge of economics. But anyways, I told the guys, okay, well, we're gonna go look a little bit back. I got to back up. So one of the other groups that thought about putting it in production in that time period, like after the 50s, said, well, it's no good having a mine in a park. So they went to Victoria and did a deal where, I can't remember the number of hectares, but sliced a piece off the park on the west side and added double on the east side. So the park actually got bigger. Giant Copper came out. Then Skagit Valley Recreation area gets put to the west of Giant Copper, and the famous thing was it was the hole in the donut, right? So there were mineral claims on one side surrounded by park, on the other side by a recreation area. And then I think, can't remember the timing, but I think they actually absorbed the recreation area into the park. So now it really is a whole, it's claims in the middle of a park. And again,
that part wasn't the park, though.
No, it's we were the hole in the donut. Like we were there, had our mineral claims. So, anyways, and then there were probably 3 different deals made over time, like to keep the area in the park, like surrounded by park, but not in the park, and the access road went through the park, and there were rules about the access road, and then later we gave up. I think it is 3 or 4 claims because they wanted a little bit more stuff for some important stuff for the park. Okay, we'll give up those, but we get to keep our claims. And this access route is the route that will be used. We won't build any other roads. It has to use this access. And then, anyways, then I tell the guys, well, let's not focus on the copper. Let's go look at the whole bunch of rocks. And we find a very interesting gold showing, kind of where nobody else had found it before. And anyways, the next thing you know, they don't want our claims. They want it parked now. So yeah, anyway.
They being the government.
The province, yes. Well, not just the province, right? The province are being pushed by
by American NGOs.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks. Just gonna say it exactly how it is, Brian.
But I mean, this is an interesting thing because an agreement was done, a deal was done. So you guys, and this is why I wanted to raise it because it's relevant to some things going on today. An agreement was done, and this is back 90s, right?
Yeah,
so
90s.
The agreement was done that all of this is going to be set aside in return. You can still mine this, and that was the deal.
Right.
But over the intervening decades, that was nibbled away. It was impossible for you to get permits. You had notices of work that were 3-4 years old.
Yeah.
And at some point, it's like, you're not going to say this, but it almost looks like expropriation by stealth. And I think it's important to raise this. I'm not trying to go over past histories because there's so many mineral claims around this province that are basically facing some of this same issue right now. Like, they're in places where you're allowed to stake a claim. They're not in parks. They're not in protected areas. But people can't get permits because people are afraid that maybe these areas might be of some value in the future elsewhere. Like the notices of work are taking forever. And why is that?
You have to think you're going to be able to climb the mountain at some point, if the mountain gets too steep and you kind of have to surrender, right?
And so, and I think, is this what, maybe editorializing, is this what we're seeing? Are we seeing a situation whereby, permits are taking so long and becoming so difficult that, you throw up your hands and say, why should I even try? Right? Which, is that what we're seeing? Well,
I think it certainly used to be way easier to get a permit to drill a few diamond drill holes. Like it's not a mine. It's a bit of exploration. It's kind of like,
which is an important piece that is generally misunderstood by a lot of people, that mineral exploration is different than mining. Mineral exploration is low impact. It doesn't actually take up that much land base. It oftentimes is very non-invasive or minimally invasive, and you're not hiring a 350-person workforce to blast away rock.
Sometimes you're carrying the equipment on your back.
Yeah, it's very low impact, and I think that's a public message that maybe no one's going to listen to this podcast on, but it is really important because there is a difference, and I think sometimes whether it be government or ENGOs or cross-border ENGOs don't necessarily understand the difference between mineral exploration and mining.
But if you've determined that you're not going to let a mine be built there, it's better to tell us sooner. That's why I say back to this thing, okay, well, tell us where we can mine.
Instead of this
right,
like yes or no, instead of long maybe.
Okay, where should we look?
What are some maybe policy issues, Brian, or policy changes that you think could be implemented to help change that?
To change the permitting?
Well, to get rid of the long maybes.
Yeah, well, I don't know. It seems like we've tried for being. This seems to be this isn't brand new.
No. So
it's like I say, I understand it more for a mine. But I personally don't understand, the first 2 drill holes we drilled up at Red Chris, that was off the end of a helicopter. A lot of exploration is, like you say, very, minimal, it's not roads, it's very kind of gentle stuff, it's not big. And anyways, I don't understand why that takes so long.
Well, and I, as a British Columbian, understanding isn't it important for us to know what assets we have? Even if we want to make the choice that we don't want to exploit those assets, shouldn't we know?
Well, that was part of a couple of the arguments at Giant Copper. It's like, well, let me go drill this gold showing, and then we'll know, like, what are you going to give up?
Well,
it's a better decision-making process.
We'll never know. We'll never know. Is that, what is down there? We'll never know.
Well, we've talked about how it's important that we have high environmental standards, which Canada does have some of the highest in the world, and that we work in partnership with community. But I think that missing piece really is, are we in a critical minerals crisis or are we not? Right. And I think that's a decision that we sort of have to put back to the public and maybe to the government, because we say that we need all of these minerals, billions and billions of minerals and dollars raised to get those minerals. But it doesn't seem that the policy really aligns with that right now.
Right. So we have to decide what we want. I know, getting back to Giant Copper, and both of you know, like, one of our young geologists was heartbroken that he didn't get to drill his, all his science, all his geology, and wanted so badly to drill. It's like, Brian, what did you do that for? I wanted to drill.
He just wanted to know. For him it was because he wasn't an investor. He wasn't going to get rich off it. He just wanted to understand it.
He's a scientist. He wanted to know. Like, he'd done all the work. He wanted to know. Was my work right?
Brian, I'm interested in knowing, so you sort of alluded to it, but what do you think is the primary risk of building a mine today? If you had to choose one of those factors that we've talked about.
What's the deal killer?
Well, it's what I said. I've said it earlier. So in the 80s it was, could you go get the money? And now it's, can you get a permit to do what you want to do? It's weird, eh? If you've got a good project and the funding for good projects seems to be it's there.
That challenge is diminished because we have a more global economy. Or?
So when I lived in Highland Valley, so my dad was working at the Bethlehem copper mine. It's up on top of it's Highland Valley, so it's a big valley in the hills, in the mountains, and the mine's on the top of the mountain to the north. So we're living at a lake down below that. And Canada's biggest copper mine was underneath all the till in the bottom of the valley deposit. It was in the valley. Nobody knew it was there. And then, you discover this mine undercover, so yeah, you don't know where you're going to be. And even that big mine, one of its biggest challenge, I don't know what it was going to cost, but it was like hundreds of millions, when hundreds of millions was a lot of money. Even though it was a really good deposit, it was probably their biggest problem was finance. Like, where do you go get $1 billion or whatever it is in 1960 or 65 or 67, whatever it was? Funding was hard.
But now capital's looking for projects.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It seems like capital, if you have a good project, is there. Can you get a permit?
So, I mean, this is a bigger, the British Columbia pan-Canadian problem. So there's lots of money theoretically out there, international finance, foreign direct investment, that used to look at Canada as a place where, I should be looking to develop mining, metals, critical minerals, what have you. That money's not looking here anymore.
Well, anyways, what I'd say, if you like, I read something the other day where Canada is still on somebody's, near the top of the list. Like, we haven't yet did what Panama's done, and taken a permit away after they build it. So, anyways,
let's not give anyone any ideas.
No, we're still considered a pretty good place.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean it's easy. It's not easy, but this is a pretty good place.
It's true, and I oftentimes think we do kind of give Canada a hard time on regulatory permitting and timelines, but I was just reading a bill that's being put forward by the U.S., and it referenced Canada as being a place where you can get a mine permit, technically, in 3 years.
3 years?
Do you think that's realistic?
Right. Well, I guess the thing is, at one point in my life, I worked in Nevada and Colorado, There was a time when BC was considered a bad place. You know, we have the Falcon Bridge assets. They left in, I can't remember, in the 70s because they couldn't get a permit to drill catfish. Put a full page ad in the Sun. Big mining company, we're leaving and never coming back, and they never did come back. Some of those projects we have are the old Falcon Bridge assets. And so, I don't know. I grew up here. I grew up in High Valley. I'm a British Columbian. I don't want to go to the Congo. I don't want to go to South America. I'm a miner and I want to mine here. So, you know, whatever the rules are, I'm going to try to follow the rules and build mines here because this is where I'm from. So it almost doesn't, you know what I mean? Like whatever the rules are, I'll figure out a way.
So that's going to take us to something that always needs to be talked about, I guess, today when you're thinking about Imperial Metals is the tailings failure at Poly. But isn't like this that's almost your answer already? Like if not British Columbians, then who? Because when that happened, you honored all your obligations and you're still there and you've done the remediation. And actually we just saw a report of an abstract at the Canadian Dam Association of some of the work that's been done is like the remediation is working. But it's been 10 years and nobody walked away. You stayed there because you want to work here.
Well, it's where I'm from. You know, anyways, I'm a British Columbian. It's like, this is where I live. This is where I want to work.
Well, and, you know, it's one of the conversations is we talked earlier before the podcast started about bonding, the issue of bonding and the costs of capital being, the cost of bonding being more than actually the cost of building a project. This is maybe a classic example of like, the bonding is there to stop people from walking away. But if you have the right companies, they don't walk away. They stay and they continue to build the project or fix the project and repair the project.
Right. I guess, you know, it's not always possible. Like, you know, bad things happen, right? So, anyways, we from my perspective, we did our best. We like where am I going to run to? Of course, I'm going to try to, you know, remember what I said? It's kind of like my baby. We worked on it here. We took it from nothing to something. Well, you want it to be something again. So stick to it, make it work.
I feel like we can all learn from that. And I think that we're so lucky to have Brian and Imperial Metals operating in BC and having more mining companies like that are really committed to British Columbia and hopefully government policies and processes to support that because that is important. I think we'll see a return of money coming back to BC and investing in our province because we do have so many minerals to give to the world and to the critical minerals race. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Primary Risk. Please follow us to receive notifications of upcoming episodes wherever you get your podcast. Check out the show notes for references to any materials that Brian or Bing or I mentioned during today's discussion. And new episodes will be released monthly. We're excited to announce our upcoming speakers, so be sure to follow us on LinkedIn to receive news, updates, and announcements. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today.
You guys are welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thanks.